Hi, and welcome to the Unreal Engine News and Community Spotlight. So first off, Interactive Gaming Ventures has joined forces with Epic Games to identify game developers building promising titles using UE4 and to bring teams meeting desirable criteria into their investment portfolio. Led by former PlayStation president and CEO Jack Tretton, Interactive Gaming Ventures plans to invest 2 to 3 experienced indie dev teams per year at $1 to $5 million per project over the next 7 years. So when a studio takes investment from Interactive Gaming Ventures, it maintains control of its IP and creation process. Interactive Gaming Ventures helps fund milestone deliverables, manages promotion and distribution, and then shares in a project's success once it ships. Interactive Gaming Ventures provides investment capital and management strategy to help independent developers force multiply their scale and success, focusing on teams looking to ship first on PC with the option of taking their game to console and mobile as well. So last week, we announced our Nvidia Edge recipients for the month of May. As always, it's difficult to narrow down our selection to only 3 titles, but here they are. Slated to release on PC and console in 2019, Dungeon Haven is an action RPG where you play as a knight restored to flesh from stone by a sentient dungeon, lusting after the power of creation. The 2-man team of Cold War Game Studios has created a beautiful adventure in which you rebel against your master and take on challenging enemies. Our second recipient was visual artist Alex Popescu. With his passion for experimental filmmaking, he set off to create a music video in UE4. Inspired by Levitate's Black Mass, he leveraged UE4's tools to develop a thought-provoking and beautiful piece set in a realistic yet surreal environment. And our last winner, in development by the small team at Portside Interactive, Sails of War is a fast-paced, action-heavy combat game giving you command of your own vessel. So dive into the creation process of their stunning visuals, enticing gameplay on the team's dev blog, which you can check out online. Earlier this week, we kicked off our Unreal Engine Marketplace Summer Sale with over 2,700 items discounted up to 90% off. This sale will last until June 12th at 11:59. Be sure to snatch up some great products by our UE4 community before time runs out. The team over at Snail Games has released their Dark and Light Dev Kit. For those unfamiliar with the title, it's a sandbox survival RPG set in a vast, fantastical world dominated by elemental forces. As you traverse breathtaking landscapes, you'll battle mythical creatures, and now you can make your own. You can modify AI behavior, swap out art assets, edit lighting, and very much more. If that sounds like your cup of tea, head over onto the Epic Games Launcher. Under the Modding tab, you'll be able to download a unique version of the Unreal Editor, allowing you to customize the world of Dark and Light. Be sure to share your creations with Snail Games on their Dark and Light forums, and they love to spotlight your work. And yesterday, we released our first preview of Unreal Engine 4.20. Changes you'll see include improvements to the proxyLOD tool, many mobile improvements and optimizations we've made for Fortnite on iOS and Android, and mixed reality mixed reality captures now in early access. Niagara will also be rolling out in early access, and there are a number of features announced at GDC, including the cinematic depth of field, improved rendering features for digital humans, all at your disposal. If you're itching to take a look, download it on the Epic Games Launcher, or it's also available in GitHub. Keep in mind these builds are still under heavy active development and may be unstable, so don't go converting your projects just yet. So on to our weekly Karma earners. These folks are jumping onto AnswerHub and answering all kinds of questions. So thank you very much to Fill Me Up, Nebula Games Inc., T. Sumisaki, Shadow River, Thompson N13, Flame of Ignis, Dotcam, Twitch Snook, McCleary, and A56444C. You guys are the bomb. So our first community spotlight is a game called Shift Quantum. The premise of which you are Axon Vertigo, the world's leading authority and most trusted friend in cerebral contentedness programming, promises to deliver a better life quality for everyone with the Shift Quantum program. So you're then connected to this cyber noir action puzzle platformer, and you're tasked to solve puzzles and create negative space by inverting the world to transform barriers into escape routes. So you can make use of all special gameplay blocks to overcome obstacles and get to the exit to find the happiness you've been searching for and promised by Axon Vertigo. It's developed by the team at Fish and Cactus, It's a really beautiful game, and it looks like an incredibly exciting and enjoyable challenge with a unique spin on gameplay, and it released last week. Our second community spotlight is a project called Dooroom. It's a roguelike game, and the players are sent into a unique space where the game environment is unpredictably changed whenever players move from the room to the next one when the doors open and close. It has a certain number of different kinds of rooms. You get weapon rooms, armor, special item traps, and so on. And as the player, they'll need to find a way to upgrade themselves, fighting with others, and to become the final survivor. So this is a solo student project. They're in their final year. Looks like an incredible game. Love the idea. So great work by that fella. Our final spotlight this week is called Unbound. It's an atmospheric 2D puzzle platformer where the main character, Soli, can conjure magic portals to travel between different realities in order to learn more about the catastrophe that ravaged his world. Inside certain portals, the physical properties of the character or world elements can change, offering new gameplay possibilities. Just really adore the art style on this one. It's a cute character, but they really make use of the changing from the really bright, colorful, and positive environment to these really dark, more scary backgrounds, and it's an interesting, unique use of gameplay. So great work to that team as well. All right, thank you for joining our news and community spotlight. Hi, and welcome to our Unreal Engine live stream. Today we're doing the 420 preview. I'm your host, Amanda Bott. With me, I have Matt Kuhlenschmidt, Marcus Wassmer, and James Golding, all lead programmers. You're making it very easy on the, the lower thief. So thank you all for joining us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Cool to be here.
We're excited to have you. I know it's late for James.
I thought he would be a floating head.
UK.
Oh.
Next time. We'll work on that technology.
Get a green screen.
Give him a little hug. But yeah, so we're excited. We just released the preview yesterday. So there's a lot of things for you to go check out and experiment. And
cool.
We'll talk about some of the features that you can try out now.
Just jump into it.
Yeah,
let's jump right into it.
All right.
I think the first part of this here is a bit of the rendering show, but 420 is a pretty cool release for rendering. One of the big releases this time around is a new depth of field that one of our main rendering engineers has been working on for quite some time now. Guillaume, if you guys saw our GDC demo, Reflections, which was our collaboration with Lucasfilm, we showed it off in that demo, and it is coming right away for everyone else. So some big features on the new depth of field. It has a nice diaphragm bokeh simulation. So you can see in the screenshot here, we've got it set up for 5 blades, so you get a nice pentagonal bokeh. But that's configurable. It's also much faster than our other depth of field methods. So the idea here is that we will eventually, not eventually, but very soon, replace all of the older depth of field methods with just this single one. If people are familiar, we have like the 3 other methods. There's a Gaussian, there's what we call circle depth of field, and then we have a really expensive bokeh depth of field. So this is meant to replace all of them and to scale from high-end PC down to console. And it looks really good. I encourage people to give it a try with 420 here. So let's go to the next one. So more features from GDC coming back for everyone. We made some improvements for digital human rendering, which we showed off with our Andy Serkis collaboration at GDC. So specifically for skin, we've added a dual lobe specular model, so you can have 2 nice spec lobes with some controls to kind of tweak them individually. We've added improved transmission for light transmission through skin, a subsurface scattering model for the eye shading model. if anyone's tried to make photorealistic digital humans, you know that getting the eyes right is really, really hard. So the subsurface scattering is subtle, but really helps that realism. And then we made some improvements to the contact shadows feature that was actually shipped in Paragon quite a while ago. It's like a screen space shadowing technique. So some improvements there and more fine grained controls to really help bring out close-in digital human shots like you see here. This was actually from Meet Mike last year's SIGGRAPH presentation, yeah, as opposed to Circus, which I talked about. But anyway, the features
Same concept.
The features will make all digital humans hopefully look better. So next one. Another big feature coming back from our GDC demo is rectangular area lights. You can see some amazing programmer art here that I threw together quickly before the stream. This is just some shooter game test content. But the key point there, you can see the outline of the light there, which is
it's a point light icon.
It's a point light icon because the tools team did not provide us with a new icon in time for the preview release.
I see. That's my fault.
Mr. Lead Tools Programmer, but coming soon. When is that Jira being finished?
Are you
working on it right now?
It's a big feature for 420.
Big feature, yeah. Okay. So the shape of the light is a square, and soon the icon will also be a square. But anyway, you can see the shadowing on the back there. You get like a nice shadow like you would expect from a big area light like that. Kind of the crucial difference between this feature and what we showed in GDC. What we were showing at GDC was using ray tracing to do dynamic soft shadows from rectangular area lights. That is not in this release. So the shadows on the rectangular area lights are only going to work for static and stationary lights and static and stationary objects, not dynamic ones. But still, I expect the community and the ArchViz community to do a much better job than I did here. Showing this feature off, so I look forward to seeing the results.
They're actually wondering, will the rectangular area lights work with the volumetric fog features and all that?
They will work for dynamic lighting, and then any stationary shadowing technique that works currently will also work with these, but like dynamic shadowing from them won't work on the volumetric fog.
All right.
And then, oh wait, what's this one, James?
James, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So one of the things we've added early access support for is mixed reality capture. So this is something that I think people have been using for a little while to show sort of VR demos in a better light. So this basically has three parts. There's a video capture part, and then there's a calibration part, and then the compositing bit. So we'll now support a couple of different webcams and HDMI capture devices to get the video, sort of green screen video into the engine. And then if you've got like a Vive tracker, one of those pucks, you can stick it on top of the camera and use that to know where the camera is and send that into the engine. So the mixed reality system in the engine now can make sure to align your camera with where that is. There's a separate calibration project you can use for getting everything set up, figuring out sort of the camera parameters and those kinds of things. So once you've calibrated it once with that project, you can use it across other projects. But then the idea is that, then you can take that video with the green screen and composite that into the scene and track the camera. So it should make it much easier for people to do this kind of composited video, which is pretty exciting. So it's in early access, but hopefully, the XR team, which is not me, but the XR guys and the Nick will be excited to get feedback on that. And I think a lot of people have been interested in that feature.
Right.
Okay, and then I guess 420 is the first release where we're adding a kind of official support for the Magic Leap 1. Mm-hmm. So if anyone happens to have one of those and wants to try out their UE4 projects on it, should be pretty cool. And so some of these features that are coming back are optimizations that were made for, for Fortnite and for, other mobile titles. So this is a big one, OpenGL RHI thread. So the way the UE4 rendering architecture is set up, it's kind of configurable per backend, how much threading we can have, how much parallelism. And so for mobile titles or PC titles running on OpenGL, we support having an extra what we call RHI thread now for machines that have a CPU with an extra thread to take advantage of it, which was not previously available. So your OpenGL games should run much better if you turn this on. Another cool feature is hardware occlusion queries for iOS and Android. So this is something that's available on consoles and PC normally, where you can use the GPU hardware to do occlusion culling. Previously on mobile, you didn't really have this. You just had your normal standard CPU frustum culling and whatnot. So that's available now on iOS and Android, and there's also an experimental software occlusion color. So one of the disadvantages of the GPU occlusion query culling is that you have to render your occlusion queries, and then it's only on the next frame that you can read that data back and use it to cull. So you kind of get the distinctive, sometimes popping as you swing the camera around. With software occlusion culling, you can actually get your culling results back on the same frame and avoid that problem. The trade-off there is that the culling is a little more coarse, so the performance isn't quite as good. Also, you have to spend CPU time doing the culling. And then, James, something about Gradle here?
Sure. So I'm not an Android expert, but the way we've added in this release is a lot of improvements on mobile. One of those, as Marcus was saying. So another one from a debugging perspective is when you compile for Android, it'll make a Gradle project. So you can open that in Android Studio. And then the idea there is that you can launch a debug session, add breakpoints, and sort of debug through the code right in Android Studio while it's running on device. And you can make changes to the code and recompile those and get the new library up to the device quickly. So it's basically just trying to get much more rapid source iteration when you're working on mobile devices. So I think our mobile team has been making good use of that, working on things like the mobile port of Fortnite and stuff. Next slide.
Yeah, proxyLOD.
Yes, proxyLOD. So, so this is a feature that was an experimental in 4.19. And so this is the idea of proxyLOD is that rather than taking a single mesh, we've had LOD generation where you take a single mesh and you build a lower poly version of that automatically. What proxyLOD does is take a large number of meshes and build a single mesh to represent all of them. So it has to bake out all the materials, has to remove a lot of geometry, remove faces that are sort of in between the meshes and stuff. So this is generally used if you're building like an open world game and you want to take an entire building, which up close is made up of hundreds of individual static meshes. You want to turn it into just one mesh to draw at a distance. That's what you use the proxyLOD simplifier to do. So previously we've had an integration of Simplegon, which works really well, but it's obviously not necessarily affordable or applicable to everybody. So we wanted to have our own solution that's built right into the engine and sort of tailored for the HLOD system. So we've been working on that for a little while. In this release in 4.20, it's sort of in official release mode. It's only supported on Windows at the moment, but we've been making heavy use of it. We now use it in Fortnite. When we first shipped sort of Fortnite Battle Royale, it was using Simplegon, and we've switched over now to using our own proxyLOD system. So that's super exciting. As well as just sort of general bug fixes and sort of optimizations, we've added a couple of features to the system as well. If we jump to the, I can't see what slide we're on. So if we can go to the one with like the old system, new system on it. So the quality is very similar, and some bits are actually sort of nicer on the new proxyLOD system there. So if we go to the next slide where it talks about hole filling. So this is a feature where often when you simplify, you've got like a building with holes for windows. It doesn't know it can remove all the interior geometry because it still thinks that they're accessible. The way that this whole system works is it actually voxelizes the geometry and then builds a polygon mesh of the resulting geometry and then simplifies that. But it doesn't know it can remove the internal geometry if there's still holes. So we've added a system where it'll actually try and fill small holes. There's like a parameter you can tweak. So it'll fill in windows and shop fronts and things. And so without hole filling, you end up with a lot of geometry inside. But with it, it just replaces it with black. You can actually specify the color, but normally black works fine. And you can remove all the interior geometry, which really helps with saving poly count on these low LOD proxies. And the other feature we added was a hard edge option. Sometimes because these meshes are so low poly, you get nasty artifacts on edges. So you can see on the left-hand side here, there's like black seam, black sort of yuck down the bottom. And that's because it treats that as a soft edge. So you're picking up some of the normal of the base of it there. what we now do is we have a tolerance. It looks for any hard edges and breaks those islands into sort of separate regions. And so now you get much cleaner geometry on sort of hard edges, which can help a lot on some of these things, particularly if you've got like a sheet or hard edges. So the final slide, if you go to the next one, it's got like an aerial shot of Fortnite. We used to have problems with some of these proxyLODs built for these tiles where you'd see sort of black lines around the edge where the sort of flat edges of the proxies, but this feature cleaned it up. So the proxies that we generate for these distant buildings sit really nicely on the landscape. So yeah, we're pretty happy with the results. So yeah, we were excited that people are going to get that out of the box and can start using that for building open world games and other applications.
So someone's asking, is proxyLOD also going to be used to render non-loaded tiles in world composition, in addition to static meshes?
I don't know details of how. It certainly could be. I think it uses the same generation stuff, so I think it can be plugged in and generated. I haven't actually tried that. It's a good question. I'll follow up on that later on and make sure that it's hooked up. But there is like a generic interface for generating these proxies, which you can either use Simplicon or our new system for. So if it doesn't work, it'll be easy. We'll follow up on that.
Mm-hmm. And if you didn't, there was a couple weeks ago, Sam Diter came on and they talked about the proxy GO2 more in depth. So if you have a lot of questions around that, those might have already been answered in that live stream. So I do recommend going and seeing if that information may have been covered previously. All right.
So
Okay. Landscape on mobile got a bit of an upgrade here. Previously, we could only support 3 layers of landscape on mobile, and for 420, we've kind of upgraded that support to allow any number of layers up to the amount of samplers that are available on the device. There's also a new kind of feature switch node for landscape now, which will allow you to kind of have the same landscape material both for PC and mobile, like on the same material, so that it makes it much more easy to scale your content from PC to mobile when you want to make a game that releases on all platforms, such as Fortnite.
James, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so Replication Graph is another experimental feature that we're putting out in 420, but it's a really exciting one for particularly sort of large multiplayer games. So the idea here is that rather than having a system where for every actor, this is mainly aimed at servers for games with lots of clients. And so strangely, with Fortnite, we're spending a lot of time optimizing the servers there. We've been trying to roll out some of those features into the release. So when you're optimizing the server and you're trying to do a lot of replication to a lot of clients, what used to happen is for every object that was replicated for every client, you'd figure out its relevancy, which doesn't scale particularly well when there's a lot of connections. So now we've made that more generic, and you can write different methods for figuring out what data needs to go to which connections. And so now we can do things like build what we call a replication graph, which is a set of nodes that build pre-filtered lists. So that includes things like maybe a spatial grid. So you figure out which actors are relevant to each part of the world, and then you can very quickly build the set of data that needs to go to any particular client. So this made a huge improvement in our server setup. It's a little bit more complicated because it's not done actor by actor. You have to kind of centralize all the logic about what data needs to get sent to whom. But we think this is a good start, and we're going to continue to develop it. But we've seen such big improvements to this. We wanted to make sure that our users had access to this early. So this is an early sort of look at that. But it can be a really big win for any games with a lot of clients where you're worried about server performance and server update rates and stuff like that. And also, not really much to say on the Steam authentications. Do we move to that slide? But basically, we've added support for that, so now we can easily talk to the Steam authentication API. You can get authentication from that, and if it fails, you can be the default behavior is being kicked from a server, but you can configure how that gets handled. So something that we've wanted for a while, but we finally have it in this release.
Audio, James?
Sure. So one of the other little audio features, most of the work on audio this release has been on sort of performance and stability and those kinds of things. But one feature that did make it in was the ability to record. This is only supported in the new audio mixer, the new audio engine, but you can now record a submix to either a new sound wave or to a wave file on disk directly in the engine. So this is kind of interesting if you want to start making more sort of tools or projects where you're actually recording audio from the microphone to, you could play that sound back again, or you could use it as an actually sort of fun recording tool or something. So there's been a bunch of different applications, some of them games, some of them on the more sort of interactive art or enterprise side, where you want to be able to get data easily from the engine. So now there's a blueprint node that lets you record sounds.
All right, Niagara.
The little thing called Niagara, Matt.
Yeah, it's a small feature that we started a couple weeks ago, and so yeah, Niagara is the next generation particle system editor that we've been making. It'll eventually replace Cascade, not in this release, but it will eventually replace Cascade, and it allows you to do a lot more scriptable particle systems and generate stuff that you couldn't normally generate in Cascade. If we have a video that we can show that kind of shows off a particular example. Not ready for the video?
No.
All right. Will we be ever ready for the video?
Maybe not.
Okay. Well, if I don't know if it's still if it's on the internet somewhere, but we did show it at GDC. It's a cool video of a character dissolving and then reappearing as a different character. And that is definitely not something you could do with Cascade. You'd have to script that and bake that in, and
You basically have to script in the material.
yeah,
Like the key feature that would show off, that particular one shows off, is that Niagara has the ability to have what we call data interfaces.
Mhm.
So the particle simulation can read data from a static or a skeletal mesh,
Right.
and then you can operate on that positional or texture UV data.
right. So I'm not going to go through the entire UI here. This is one portion of the UI, but just to give you an idea of it's obviously vastly different looking than Cascade. It's still a work in progress, but the idea is, you have obviously a preview that shows, what particle system you're looking at, and then you have if you're familiar with Sequencer, this will look familiar, which is sort of a timeline, and these are emitters, and you can scrub and you can play back and you can see your particles update in real time. And if you click on emitter, you see a bunch of parameters over here. So these are parameters for the whole system, parameters for the specific emitter, and then parameters per particle.
Keep going.
Oh, okay, I didn't know you were stealing the mouse from me. And so there's a list here of you can drag and drop different inputs into like, if you want to do spawn rate there, you can see that spawn rate is driven by the emitter age, which is pretty cool. It's not shown here, but you can also add custom HLSL code right to the emitter age and do your own like math and whatever. And then also not shown here is a completely separate UI for scripting down to the particle level in a sort of material editor style or blueprint editor style graph editor, where you can script down to the particle and do some of these crazy interactions where you interact with this data from a static mesh or a skeletal mesh or whatever. It's extremely powerful. We're just this is the first release, so please, if you try it out and you have questions or you have feedback, please go to the forums and post that. I remember when we did this for the UMG release, and it was super valuable to get user feedback. And as we go, I'm not sure how much we'll get done for 420, but as we go along, we'll definitely have docs, and especially a Cascade to Niagara conversion guide and things like that. That's all planned. So yeah, it should be awesome.
So if you want, we can try it.
I do want, so I should open it right now and move it.
Yep. Alt enter.
Yeah, it's not.
Except it's not actually playing.
It's not actually. It's a black. That's not good. It's a black screen.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Do we have like VLC or something on here?
Not sure. Well, if you want to keep talking, I can pull it up on here.
Okay. We'll try to get that. Okay. Another
It's a
feature.
really cool video.
It is. It's really
Take
cool.
our
I
word for
can't. I would mimic it, but I can't dissolve, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Okay. Material editor. So you can now sample a curve, a linear color curve in a material. The way this works is you create a curve like normal if you use Sequencer or anything like that. You can see a curve editor. You create your curve like normal. There's also a representation at the bottom that shows sort of what it would look like as a gradient. And you store this in a texture atlas, which is basically done for you. If you see the picture on the right, you see the texture editor, and then you can sort of select which curves you want to add to your atlas. It's just in a texture atlas because that's easier for the GPU to read from. Most projects, I imagine, would be able to store their entire set of curves in one atlas, depending on the size you make it. So can we go to the next slide real quick? And so the way this works in the material editor is that you have some input, which in this case is a texture sample, which represents your X or your time, and you pass it into this curve node. If you click on the curve node, you see the details panel in the middle image that shows you tell it which curve from the atlas you want to use, and then which atlas to use. In this case, it's just a gradient going from like black to through purple to white. And then you can just, it reads like a normal texture. You can read every channel. You have and this one's passing into base color and opacity. And then you can see on the final image there how it applies. So in this case, it's a sort of a texture that has various levels of black and white and gray, and that matches up to the curve. And at the image on the top, which is blue, is an example of you can set a material on the material instance. You can override the curve that you want to use. And so why is this a feature? So it solves, like previously you would have to sort of do all this tedious gradient sort of work in some other external tool and import that as a texture. Very tedious. So now you can just do this right in the editor without ever leaving the editor. And you can do much more like sort of non-linear looking gradients and things like that, than what we have provided in I think material functions that do gradients and stuff. So, yeah, that'll be in 420. And let's see.
Looks like your video is working.
My video is working.
Yeah.
So back to Niagara. Video. Okay. So this is the Niagara video. I'll just let it play. I think that's probably the effect. So that was all done with Niagara, that dissolve and recreation of the character. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the kind of idea, like represents the power of Niagara.
Yeah. Basically, all the particle spawning was distributed over the mesh. It picked up all the position and UVs from that, and then can make a complicated curve and then come back out and reform on a different skeletal mesh.
Yeah.
Which was animating in the background for that effect. And
Yep.
it's going to be really powerful, I think.
Yes. If you've ever used something like Houdini, this some of the same sort of things you can do. What sort of we're looking at. Okay, UMG safe zone. So previously, UMG had a safe zone widget that allowed you to sort of push everything in to, deal with issues, safe zone issues on TVs where you have to push them in because of borders that are not that are unique to TVs. But obviously, things like phones, iPhone X example has non-uniform safe zones. It's got that little notch. And as we started doing Fortnite on iPhone, it became apparent that the tools were not good enough to sort of represent that in the editor, or in Pi in this case. So we added sort of mobile, or not mobile specific, but device specific safe zones. So in your mobile safe zone, or in mobile settings, you can add all these safe zones. They can be non-uniform. Things like the mobile content scale factors used to scale the phone and tablet resolutions in UMG and Pi. There's all this. We added a feature for previewing landscape, portrait, and flip configurations, and we added also a bunch of more device previews that previously weren't there, like the iPhone X. And so in this picture, what you're seeing is the red areas of the safe zones. Oops. Well, I'll show it here. The images labeled 1 are the safe zones. 2 gives you some information about what the content scale factor is what you're previewing, and 3 gives you the DPI scale of the UI. And you can see here that everything will be pushed out. In this case, this is an actual safe zone widget, so this will be pushed out. The content of the actual UI would be pushed out to avoid getting placed in the safe zone. And the same is true in the bottom. The reason why there's a safe zone here is because the iPhone has this little, like, you can flip up with your finger. So that's something you wouldn't want to put, buttons and stuff in. So yeah. And you can, if you have some other weird devices, you can add your own. You don't have to wait for us to add devices into the list. Okay, mesh description. So why is this a blank slide? Mesh description is a new source format for meshes, currently starting with static mesh. Static mesh previously had something called a raw mesh, which is just sort of a list of triangles, triangle wedges, actually. It was not, unless you were a C++ programmer and you wanted to get deep in the engine, it was really not usable. Our goal with this is to add is to unify all of our geometry formats. We're starting with static mesh because that's the easiest. But we want static and skeletal mesh and eventually things like, landscape and whatever to all have sort of the same unified mesh format. And that allows us to simplify the code for importing, simplify the code for converting between formats, and allows people to sort of have an easier time of, adding their own sort of mesh formats without having to have a completely different source format. For 420, what does this mean for you? If you're an artist, it means nothing. You won't have to do anything. Raw mesh, if you're a programmer, raw mesh, and you've made it some using raw mesh, that's okay. It'll live side by side for now. Eventually we will deprecate, we're working towards deprecating raw mesh. If you're a content creator, in the future, what you can look forward to is this new mesh format also comes with a scriptable API. So you will be able to, through Blueprints or Python or any other scripting language we add, you will be able to actually create an importer yourself or manipulate geometry without having to touch C++. And another thing we're working on is we're working on a way to convert or import geometry separately from weights for things like static and skeletal mesh, and that'll just make it a lot easier to do that. And then this also, we have another API that's called editable mesh, which is very much in flux right now, but the idea for that is it's sort of a geometry editing API, so you can think of that as like, I can add an edge, or I can delete faces, or things like that, which as we showed a couple of GDCs ago, we were working on modeling tools, sort of not necessarily working very quickly towards that, but the plan is that we're still working on modeling tools and we'll use this sort of API in this unified format. So I just wanted to mention that. I think it's cool, but there's no image because it's all a data format. So scripting, okay. A lot of work has been done on scripting. We're not fully ready to release our Python plans in 420, but we are working on Python editor scripting, and along with that some tools. So in this case, you can add scripts that run on specific assets that you right-click on the content browser, and in this case it does something called nativize melee notifies, or nativize reload notifies, which probably it sounds like some kind of Fortnite thing. But anyway, these are just scripts you can run.
Shockingly.
Yes. Yes. You can run these on selected assets. You can add your own. Python, the way we're working, how we're making the editor scriptable with Python is it's sort of the same way we use Blueprints. We have a reflection system. Everything that you mark as a U function gets reflected upon into Blueprints, and you can do the same thing with Python. And the enterprise team added some additional modifications you can make to static meshes in scripts, such as adding LODs, things like that. Not necessarily modifying the source data, but manipulating settings on the static mesh itself. And
yeah, we use this stuff like the running script on assets. We found, as we've been sort of optimizing content and reviewing content, we found this pretty useful for if we wanted to go through and batch generate LODs for a bunch of skeletal meshes because a setting changed, or we wanted to generate a report on find all the meshes with this thing and flag them up, or the one that we did here was that we changed the we wanted to change every notify from a blueprint to a native class, and that was what the script, we just wrote a little script to do it, and the tech animators could do that. So it's really good if you've got a lot of content and you want to start doing batch operations on them, you can just write scripts and run them. So I think we're going to be using this more and more internally to just like grapple with, when you've got games with lots of content, it really helps. Yeah,
it's also really good for the scripter who's not necessarily a C++ expert, or if you don't have enough C++ engineers to go around. It's pretty quick to write these one-off scripts without a lot of heavyweight creating a module, C++, compiling, all that jazz. So yeah, it's really good for those kinds of things. So sequencer, so we changed all the time data to be stored as integers in sequencer. This allows us to sort of not suffer from sort of floating point rounding issues and time drift and things like that. So everything will now be frame accurate in sequencer going forward. And there's a new track in sequencer for playing media sources. So if you had like some kind of pre-rendered cutscene that you wanted to put into your scene in a game, you could do that now, which is pretty cool. It uses the media framework, I believe. Weighted tangents. I've seen this requested a lot on the forum. So finally, weighted tangents are here. So you can now weight your tangents with this cool. And if you don't know what that is, you can sort of push, stretch, and pull, and it applies a weight to the tangent there, and you can create unique curves that would be otherwise very difficult without doing some kind of baking or adding tons of keyframes. Okay, finally, blueprints have a feature called bookmarks. If you're familiar with using something like Visual Studio, you can bookmark code in this way. And in this case, in blueprints, you can bookmark places in the graph. So you can add new bookmarks by clicking the star in any graph editor, and it'll sort of record where you are looking, and you can give it a name, and then you can double click on it in the bookmarks tab and quickly navigate to it. So if you have huge blueprints like our games do, you can quickly bounce around to the interesting parts without looking through tons of lines and wires and things like that. Yeah, I think that's it on the features.
We did it. Those are the things.
That's all we did.
That's all.
No,
Yeah,
That's it.
that's literally all that's in the no, there's actually more.
There's a huge amount of things, but these are some of the highlights.
Yeah. Well, thank you for going through those. I think we've got time for a few questions. So, here we go. This is your moment. Do any of you know if the control rig feature will make it into the 420 release?
James?
It is not in the 420 release. We continue to work on it. It's a big feature. We're sort of figuring out what our roadmap for that looks like. We kind of know where we're going first. We'd like to try and put it through its paces and make sure that it performs and get it into the hands of our technical animators. So if anyone doesn't know, this is the system for animation blueprints are really good for blending different animations together and doing some modifications on them, but they're not as powerful as like a full-on reading system like you might find in Maya or something, where you can set up a lot of procedural operations on bones. And so we've got this control rig system, which will, the long-term goal is to allow us to do things like much more complicated procedural bones, full body IK, retargeting, these sorts of things. So it's a long-term project. We're still working on it, but it's not released in this release.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Someone was asking about, do we know if there are any updates? So we touched on, I don't know that we touched on it here. I've seen hints of it, but as far as updates regarding the Vulkan API, 420?
Sure. 420 has a significant number of improvements to Vulkan. I think at last couple of tests we were doing on UT and Shooter Game and on Fortnite, we were about performance equivalent with DX12. And as far as features and just everything working properly, it's got feature parity and working properly as well. Different platforms sometimes have different issues. Like there's certain Linux distros or drivers that have, kind of their own little idiosyncratic Vulkan issues that we're still working through. But yeah, anybody with a Vulkan project should definitely try out 420. Should be a big improvement.
Cool. Are there any additional? So we've seen some updates regarding the material layering, but anything specific to 420?
There's been some bug fixes and maybe some UI tweaks, but nothing on a system level, I think.
Yeah,
right
I mean
now.
that released, or at least went early access in 419, right?
Yeah.
I think we still classify that as early access.
Right. Cool. So then asking about the real-time ray tracing, that's not 420, correct?
Real-time ray tracing is not 420, no.
So we'll have to
The kind
wait.
of To answer the question, the plan is by the end of the year, in probably not in a point release, but by the end of the year in like the main line on GitHub, we'll have the DXR API implementation, and the plan is to also have like the area light shadows hybrid ray tracing feature enabled, and then we're going to add, more stuff onto there as we go. The reason it's taking so long is that we were doing the demo, and doing the demo kind of exposed to us a lot of the things we would need to change in the engine to make that system scale to a scene that's bigger than an elevator and 3 characters. So some of that fundamental re-architecting work is just a large amount of work to do without breaking everyone's games. So we're working through that, but end of the year you should be able to have the API to play with.
Do you know if we can expect to see any of the Paragon animation nodes in 420?
I do not know. James, do you know?
No, not at the moment. So that is something we would like to do. We are working on that. Just need to find some time and some resources to do it. But this is the stuff that Laurent Delaire did for Paragon. There's a bunch of cool bits of tech in there. We are absolutely trying to move those into the engine, and we'd like to release them as some kind of test project. They're not in 420. Maybe we'll get it for 421, but it really depends on how things go. But it's certainly something we really want to do.
Awesome. Some folks are asking, now that we've gone to the integer and format with the audio on sequencer, or on words are hard, guys. Are they going to be able to export audio from sequencer in 420, or do you know if there are any plans to make that possible?
Export audio? I thought that was already supported in some capacity, but maybe not.
It's an Aaron McLaren question.
Well, yeah, or it's a Max Chen question.
Yeah, Max Chen, maybe.
Don't know the answer to that.
Other person question.
Yes.
That's fine. Let's see. And then do you know if there are any work on a demo scene for Niagara?
There are going to be several content examples available. I don't know what we're going to have for 420, but I know that we are working on we have an artist that is working on a few content examples. Hopefully for 420 we'll have something. I mean, as we go forward, there's going to be a lot more content examples, and we'll try to retrofit some of our we're going to use it in some internal projects like Fortnite going forward, but I'm hoping we can also get that in some of our shipping, or the games that we ship, like sample projects as well. But yes, I mean, we are going to have sample content for Niagara that shows how it's set up, and more than just there'll be some basic ones. Like, you don't want to start off trying to learn how to do the character dissolving. You want to start off with something more simple. So it'll probably, something more simple first, and then more complex later.
Cool. Let's see. One last. Okay. So what is currently not available in Niagara that Cascade does support? So is there anything that it can't do that Cascade could?
I think some of the GPU particle stuff is not quite there yet.
Yeah, I would say that the GPU particle systems are more stable in Cascade than in Niagara.
I think some things are not as performant. I know ribbons are.
Ribbons.
No, ribbons are better in
significantly better than
in Niagara.
Cascade.
In Cascade.
They're significantly better than Cascade.
Yes. So actually, one of the next goals for Niagara is to start using it in Fortnite, and that'll really sort of prove out some of the performance aspects of Niagara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think mainly there might be a few things here and there, but I think the big difference for what might look like features is there's a lot of modules in Cascade that do specific things that are kind of hard coded in C++, and in Niagara, you can make your own modules to emulate that behavior in the module script, and we've done a certain amount of basically taking Cascade modules and turning them into Niagara modules. So as far as missing features, I think what you're mostly going to see is modules that we haven't converted yet to have a Cascade or to have a Niagara equivalent. But if you really, really need one, you actually now have the ability to make it yourself right in the node script instead of waiting for us. But
Yeah, we will ship with a set of modules that are in the engine. We don't expect you to make every module from scratch.
correct. The intention is to have basically parity with Cascade modules eventually. I don't think we've got to 100% for the 420 release.
Yep. Yeah, again, don't delete all your Cascade particle systems.
Yeah, that's
Please
probably a little
Please do
premature.
not do that. Especially not in Preview 1. I think it's a little unstable, especially in Preview 1. But for any experimental feature, do not use that as this is a shippable thing.
Yeah.
We are not going to. We are going to move forward with Niagara for the future. It's not like we're going to just be like, okay, forget Niagara, but it is still very early for it. So.
What's that pipeline going to look like for folks that have been using Cascade? Are they going to be able to use some of their old creations?
I would love for there to be an upgrade on some kind of conversion path in the future. We're trying to focus more on getting Niagara feature and stable first, but I would love, we should, as much as possible, we should try to convert automatically the Cascade particle systems to Niagara. I don't think we'd ever fully get rid of Cascade unless we could prove that we could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just move it to a plugin.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's the same thing with Matinee. If you've been following sort of Sequencer, Matinee was our old version, and that has existed since UE3, and we still have not deleted it. So it's not like Cascade is going to be deleted anytime soon.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we need to wrap up for today. I want to thank you all for joining us. Hopefully enlightened some folks as to what they can expect to try out in the next couple weeks. And if you're interested in, please go download the preview. It definitely helps us when we get your feedback. You can find things how we can improve in the next week or in the next months or so before release. And then, work out all the bugs and the silly kinks and stuff. So again, thank you all for joining. As always, I tossed in the survey into the chat. Let us know what you thought of the stream, what topics you would like us to cover in the future. It's really helpful for us to know what you would like to see. And always check for your local UE4 meetup groups at meetup.com/pro/Unreal Engine. Submit your projects to the Nvidia Edge program. You could be one of the lucky few. I'm sending a 1080 Ti too, so we always love to see your outstanding projects. If you'd like to have your video as a countdown, send us a video at community@unrealengine.com, and it's just send us a 5-minute video of speed development. So whether it's in blueprints or laying out your level or something like that, we always love to see it. And be sure to follow us on social media. So we will see you next week for our UE4 Jam results. It's a pre-recorded stream because we're all going to be out at E3 with a lot of excitement coming out of the show there. And we'll see you then. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.